Hey Todd, how's it
Hey
going?
Trent, going good.
Um, so we are doing this podcast. This is a podcast of your creation. So one of the things that I think the listeners of this podcast would like to know is like, why? Why do you think this one is useful, helpful, necessary? Um, and why should someone listen?
Well, yeah, I would love to talk about that. First, though, I'd like to just kind of give a brief introduction of who I am and
Okay.
you know
Yeah. Yeah, great.
where I how long I've been around and whatnot. So, yeah, Todd Smith is my name. I've been doing working in Wi-Fi since 2003. I think it was when I first got the CWNA. So it's been a bit, and I'm CWNE 404 now.
Okay.
I got that. This is I've got to renew this year, so I got that in 2020. So from 2003 to 2020 is a pretty long time to go from CWNA to NE. So it took
Those
me a
tests
while
were
to get
hard.
there.
Those tests were hard back in the day.
Um, yeah, they were hard, but what really helped me a lot was I was actually getting my hands dirty in Wi-Fi and doing a lot of the stuff that we were learning about. So that helped a lot. Um, but going back to like that 2003 time period, it's interesting. Today I'm working at Comcast Business on their enterprise side as a mobility solutions architect. Um, but in 2003, oddly enough, I was working at Comcast. I think they were AT&T broadband at the time before Comcast bought them. But I was
Okay.
doing tech support for their high-speed internet, their cable internet, right? Tech support, uh, and
Where
that
was that?
that was out of Denver.
Okay.
So Greenwood Village was the name of the building. Um, and I was a college graduate in 2000, not 2000, 2000 and what was it? One? Is that when the big .com crash hit?
Yeah, around then,
Yeah, I
I
was
think.
working at a
Yeah.
.com startup when I graduated college, and I thought my life was made. I was going to be a millionaire like all the other .com, startup employees. But then that bubble burst, and I couldn't find a job, and so I ended up moving out to Denver and got a job selling some home securities systems over the summer, and then worked at Comcast or AT&T broadband at the time. But I was, at the time doing that, I was just bored. Obviously, that wasn't something that I wanted to do for a career. And I'm like, I gotta, gotta find something else. And I heard, Wi-Fi was kind of picking up. I was really interested in Wi-Fi for some reason. And so I remember searching for some kind of any kind of Wi-Fi class that might be taking place. And oddly enough, there was I forget which Denver college it was. I think it was community college there. Um, Somebody was teaching the CWNA uh, coursework, out of the book.
Robert Bartz.
What's that?
Was it Robert Bartz?
No, who was teaching?
Yeah.
No, it was a woman. Her name was Robbie. I can't remember her last name.
Oh, okay.
She was teaching it. She really didn't know a lot about Wi-Fi, but she was just a teacher in their, I think, tech department. And so I took that class, went there, I think it was once or twice a week at night, and I just ate it up. I loved everything about it. And NA, it's a great course because it just dives deep into RF. And I just loved it. And so after taking the class, I went and got certified, passed the test in 2003. And then shortly after that, I got a job at a company called Wavelink
Oh,
out of Salt
wow.
Lake. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if yeah, sounds like you're familiar with them.
I I I mean, just heard of.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah, they had a vendor agnostic um, infrastructure management solution.
Hmm.
So at the time, this was before controllers, before the whole
Yep.
industry moved over to controller-based access points, Wi-Fi. So there was this vendor agnostic solution that would then manage access points from Cisco and Symbol at the time, which got bought out by Motorola,
Yep.
uh, Proxim, a lot of those early access point vendors. This solution would manage those access points in a dashboard, similar to like what we have now with controllers managing a bunch of access points.
Yep.
And that was popular at the time because the only other alternative, they were autonomous APs, so you had to log into each one and configure them manually, and nobody wanted to do that.
Yep.
And so that's kind of where I really, started really getting into Wi-Fi. I was
What'd
working,
you do for Wavelength? Were you a support
yeah,
or
I started
okay?
out tier 2 tech support for that. They called it mobile manager was that solution.
Okay.
Um, and so, I built a lab, a test lab there, and had all these, old Cisco 350s, Cisco 1200s, 1100s. This was really old AP models that some
Yep.
people might be familiar with who've been around the block a bit. Um, the old Symbol 4121s, 4131s. Like I said, some other models from Proxim. But it was just awesome to be able to get my hands on this hardware
Yep.
and to start playing around with because I didn't have any of that prior. And so that's really where things took off for me. And I moved from up to into QA, and then into the development team to develop more of the software that so we can add more um, AP models uh, to the software that can be managed by that dashboard. And then after that, I went on to Cisco, so moved out to Texas after that, in Dallas, and worked at Cisco, the Richardson campus, doing a lot of Wi-Fi performance testing. Was there for a couple of years, and then I found this startup called Theatro that they were creating this little voice over Wi-Fi device. It's similar to, I guess, a Vocera device.
Yep.
Um, and they really didn't know anything about Wi-Fi, and so they hired me on and did a bunch of like interoperability testing, created what I would call an awesome test lab, where we
Hmm.
built these we built these AP stands. It was really cool actually. The owner's son was a welder, and so I said, I need these big stands that can go up, 20 feet in the air. Um, and I need these, across for 4 different AP models to be up there. And I need that cross that the APs are connected to come down so I can change them out from time to time. And then I need this whole stand to be on wheels so I can move them around the warehouse and kind of simulate different environments. So they built 5 of these stands. And so, and we had this big warehouse. And so I had, 5 stands with 4 APs on each stand, different vendors, different models, and just tested a ton of like roaming and just all things performance, make sure the voice um, would work as it roams from AP to AP, and that the roaming takes place seamlessly and there's no hit on the voice quality and things like that. And so that's really where I kind of like learned a ton because I was in the trenches, trying to get this little device to just work right and then work well, and working with the dev team to just come up with really interesting um, tweaks in the firmware to get it to do uh, uh, different things that just help with the performance. So that was a lot of fun. Um,
You know what? It kind of seems like we have a little like we're playing both sides. You were in a lab environment which was clean, the protocol worked, you know, as you tested it. And then where I was coming from was, oh, something got put out in the wild in this crazy environment. Now you have to troubleshoot it. And that's a very interesting thing because like you tested everything in the lab and then probably out in the wild as some, in some
yeah,
location. things
Yeah.
things
Well,
didn't go so
that's
well.
exactly what it was. At first, it was just a lot of that lab work, right?
Yeah.
Testing.
Yep.
But then as Theatro started bringing on more and more customers who were using the solution, I was actually out in the field at a lot of different retail
Yep.
companies. So, from, Home Depot, Sam's Club, Walgreens, Tractor Supply. I mean, there's just so many different retail um, companies. I would actually go out to a lot of their different sites and do using Channelizer. I'm looking at the spectrum, doing my spectrum analysis using Ekahau to do my surveys. And one really cool thing that we did with Ekahau, um, we had a dev team in India, and these guys were pretty smart, pretty sharp guys. And I kept on saying to them, I need to test with the Theatro device. I need to do a survey with the Theatro device. We can't use these USB dongles. I want to see what these devices are seeing. So so they reverse engineered a little bit and figured out a way for us to use the Theatro device as the device that sends the Ekahau software, um, the RF, the Wi-Fi data.
Yeah.
And so I was actually doing um, surveys with a laptop with the Theatro device USB in the laptop, connected
Hmm.
to the Wi-Fi of that retail store, and walk around doing my surveys. And I've got my Theatro device, I've got the channelizer plugged into my laptop. I've got other dongles because a lot of times I'm also doing OmniPeak packet captures, just carrying this massive laptop with all these dongles sticking
Yep.
out of it, collecting all this data. It was awesome. It
Yep.
was I mean, it's a lot different today because Ekahau decided to make things really easy for us to use an iPad or a phone to carry
Yep.
around and do surveys. So now it's easy, but then it
Yep.
was a
It was a
different
lot.
beast. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the laptop I was using at the time also was my personal laptop. Startups like to get you to use your own stuff as much as they can get away with. And so
Yeah.
before I made them buy me a survey laptop, I had my 17-inch Dell,
Oh man.
laptop, thick laptop, heavy. And I remember I did one of my first surveys for Theatro was at a Bass Pro Shops, huge
Yep.
200,000 square foot facility, carrying this massive laptop around. I mean, my arm was just dead after that. So that's when I made them get me a Microsoft Surface, which is a lot better to work with.
Yeah. Which
But yeah,
one?
out in the field, just in the trenches, working in different environments, seeing how the device actually worked in the real world versus, in a test lab, dealing with neighboring interference. Because as you know, a lot of retail, you know, share like a shopping center, right? So you have,
Yep.
a lot of neighboring Wi-Fi that's interfering with, the Wi-Fi you're trying to work with, and channel usage is oftentimes crazy in those environments. And so it was a lot of fun to just get it to work,
Yeah.
and to do some designs, a lot of design work to make it work. And these retailers were great. They were happy to work with us, and implement, the recommendations that we would provide so that this Theatro device worked, and it worked great. But yeah, those were good times. Those are really good times. Um, and like I said before, now I'm at Comcast Business, on the enterprise side. Been here now for what has it been, since March? So 9 months, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's, so far a lot of fun. Um, so that's a bit about me. You were asking though about the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And why why do a podcast, and what makes this one different? And for me, I've been to several different the WLPC conferences. Um, I went to, I think the first one was in Austin, Texas. And so I was in Texas at the time working at Theatro. And so I went down to that, and that was fun.
I was at that
Um,
one.
were you? Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
At
And then I think,
Austin and Dallas, I was able to go to.
yeah, I
And
went to one of the
thanks,
ones in
fun.
Dallas. I don't know if it was the second or third year of the WLPC. I forget which one I went to.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, but one of my favorite things about going to those conferences, and then later on, I did the boot camp plus the conference, and but just the presenters, right? They get up there and they'll talk a bit about themselves first. It's always one of my favorite parts about these conferences is to just learn more about these other, Wi-Fi professionals and, where they came from and where they're working and what, experiences did they have, in their career working with Wi-Fi. It was always just super, super interesting to me. And it really kind of came home to me. I was taking the CW AP class, the boot camp with Peter McKenzie, several years ago in the Phoenix WLPC. And, I don't know if you've taken a boot camp from Peter, if you talk to him much, but he likes to tell stories. He's a
Yep.
storyteller. And that was just awesome. I just loved hearing these stories about, going to do a survey at like some bingo parlor there somewhere in London or roundabout,
Yep.
and finding, I remember he was talking about finding the source of interference that kept on causing problems for this bingo hall. Turned out it was these microwave ovens that they had just
Yep.
put in. And as soon as Peter told him, about them being the source of the interference, and he went into a lot more detail, the owner just went and grabbed these brand new microwave ovens and just tossed them in the dumpster, because that's how important Wi-Fi was for them
Yep.
at this place. But anyway, it was just always a lot of fun to hear these stories from the people in Wi-Fi. And so I thought, you know what? You get some of that, like in some of the other podcasts that are out there with, Clear to Send, Roel and Francois, and some others. They'll have guests on, obviously, and those guests will talk a bit about themselves. And I thought it'd be kind of neat just to have a podcast where that is the podcast, right? You talk about the different Wi-Fi professionals, and just what they've done throughout their career, where they've worked, who they worked with, what experience have they had, you know, those kinds of things. And so, but you know what? It's a new year. Let me throw my hat in the ring and try this whole podcasting thing out, and just learn more about people in the industry. So that's kind of really, why I decided to put out a podcast.
So can I tell you what kind of intrigued me when you first
Yeah,
started
please do.
pitching it? You know, I have friends that are still at the VAR, and I think that there's kind of this, like, the younger generation, they aren't as excited about IT and maybe don't understand IT. And from what I understand about hiring and recruiting, it's very hard to find, you know, people that are enthusiastic about getting into technologies. And I
Yeah,
think having professionals kind of tell their story, how they got here, what they love about, this type of work is critical. Like, I think this can be a good platform to inspire people. Every now and then in the WLAN Pros Slack, you'll see someone, how do I get, further into this thing? I mean, there was just one recently. And being able to hear other people's stories about, like, you for example, you were describing having to travel around to a lot of retail stores. Young person might like that, right? It's like you get to go travel the world and get paid to do it, and experiment with technology, get your hands dirty. So that's something that I think that is a unique aspect of this, is like how to show people that excitement. For example, like when you were in the early days of Wi-Fi, like being able to take, like, a device like, that little Windows CE thing with a little stylus pen or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
and actually do work, right? Mind blowing back then. And it was such a fundamental shift. Now it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's a necessity. But I think that it's not as easy to understand how cool this is, right? because kids, an 18-year-old right now was born in, you know, 2005.
Yeah,
They have lived in a household that had Wi-Fi since they
their
were
whole life.
born,
Yeah,
possibly. So, kind of saying, hey, look at this. We are solving problems and now you can do stuff everywhere. And this is why it's important. I like that a lot. And so
yeah,
you telling your story is cool.
yeah. Thanks. No, I really appreciate that. And I agree with you. I think Wi-Fi is just something that we all use. It's in our homes, it's at work, it's in our churches, it's wherever we go in our schools. And we all just kind of mindlessly use it nowadays, right? Because it's
Yep.
just there. Um, but it's fun to really kind of understand just how it works and why it works, and what did people do to make it work well, where it's working well, and where it's not working well. And you hear a lot of people complaining about the Wi-Fi sucks, right? Well, it's really interesting also to go into an environment where the Wi-Fi does suck and then figure out why, right? And to have
Yep.
the tools to figure out why, and then have the know-how to make it great again, right? I mean, think that just being able to do that and understand that, for me, it's a ton of fun to do. And I think, um, new engineers getting into, wireless networking, once they realize, once they get into Wi-Fi a bit and they learn enough about Wi-Fi to know that, wow, there's a lot going on here that allows me to, check my email on my phone or whatever they're doing, right? Um, it's fun to see those young engineers, like, the light kind of go off in their heads, and this is really cool. Um, yeah, I've interviewed a ton of people, for like junior, Wi-Fi engineer positions, and you're right, it's kind of hard to find people who have that excitement, you know, um, and maybe it is because Wi-Fi is just Wi-Fi for a lot of people. Wi-Fi has it's always been there. It's always just kind of worked. No one thinks about, or few probably think about how to make it work, right? Until they're off on their own, and they're in an apartment complex and trying to use their Wi-Fi, and their Wi-Fi sucks, and they start looking at channels and things, and then again cogs start turning, like, oh, there's a lot more to Wi-Fi than I thought.
I have found that one of the best ways when I was at the University of Utah, one of the best ways to get, full access is just tell people I'm here to fix the Wi-Fi. People roll out the red carpet
Yep.
because if it was painful and hard, it it was, it ruined their day
Yeah. That re-
sometimes.
Sorry, go ahead, but that reminded me of a story.
I've got plenty of stories like that, but like when I was a consultant, I got brought into a college that the board was convinced that they were losing students because the Wi-Fi in the dorms sucked. And
Wow.
they were right. As soon as I was in the dorms and had to like do surveys and saw that the Wi-Fi sucked, I mean, just imagine being a student paying tuition or your parents paying tuition or whatever it is. You can't you can't watch TV. Everyone uses Netflix, and you can't do your homework because everyone else is trying to watch TV. And um, and then you call support, and support says, you have an Ethernet, just plug in. And they look at their little MacBook Air that doesn't have an
No
Ethernet
Ethernet.
port,
Yep.
and they're just like, IT has lost their minds. And so, anyway, I think that there should be people that are interested in what goes on behind the scenes. And I think that, you telling your story and, telling other ones is a powerful thing. So thank you.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, I really enjoy hearing the stories, and what you just said reminded me, when you said that once people know that you're there to fix the Wi-Fi, they're like, come on in, do whatever you need to do. Let's get this fixed. I remember I was doing a lot of surveys at like Macy's or Nordstrom, big, retail, what do they call those mall stores? but one of those big, retail stores. And walking around doing my survey, collecting all my data, I would get a lot of odd looks from workers and customers alike. Here's this guy walking around with a laptop. Everyone thought I was video recording people as I walked around. And so I remember out in California somewhere, I would always check in with security, obviously at first, let them know I'm there, and they'll escort me to where I need to go, and then I'll start doing my thing. Sometimes they'll follow me around for a bit, and then they go off and do their own thing. Well, at the end of doing a survey at one of these stores, the security guy came over to me, and he was kind of smiling, laughing a little bit. I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I've had people call security on you like 7 times today because they think you're recording them."
Yeah.
And then a lot of times as you're surveying these places, you're near the fitting rooms, right? Where people don't want any kind of video
Yep.
recording to take place, or you're in like some kind of apparel where, again, people may not want video recording taking place. And so they would call security on me. And when he told me that, I'm like, I need to do something about that, because when people actually do stop and ask me, "What are you doing?" and I say, "Oh, I'm here working on the Wi-Fi," like you said, they're like, "Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Yeah, let's get this fixed." And so I came up with this dumb sticker. A lot of people may not like this, but it's making Wi-Fi great again. I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
that or not. This is like before Trump and all his craziness. But I had this on my laptop as I was doing my surveys, and people would see, "Oh, Wi-Fi, you're working on the Wi-Fi." And then people would just smile at me as I walked by. Or they'll say, "Yeah, great, I'm glad you're here," versus
Yep.
giving me these sideways looks and calling security on me. So that was interesting.
I feel like the iPad and the Sidekick really changed that, because people can see an iPad and be like, "Oh, yeah, he's just dorking around on an iPad."
Yeah.
But when it's a full laptop and these strange things that you don't know what it is, you're like, "Are those microphones? Are those cameras?" Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So
Totally. Well, yeah, there's a lot of fun stories. And again, that's, the point of this podcast, right, is to learn more about the other professionals out there and to hear their stories. Um, a lot like when we go to these conferences, or if we ever, work together on a site somewhere, and we have a chance to just kind of sit and just talk to each other. You have these talks, these conversations where people are just sharing their stories and their experiences. And I love that. And so I hope that, we can do that with this podcast, that we can get some, um, interesting other professionals on, and ask them questions, get them talking, and just learn more about them. That's what we're trying to do.
yeah, very cool.
All right.
Um, Anything else you want to add? Do you want to? I do have, you know, an item that I wanted to, just ask about,
Sure.
like a project that was just a little bit more than you could chew. You bit off more than you could chew. Like, is there anything that like you got into it and you were like, "Oh,
Well, I remember when I first started at Theatro, I went from Cisco, large corporation.
yeah,
Everything that I did at Cisco was already predefined. I was just kind of
yeah,
going through the motions. And now I'm at Theatro, brand new startup. I think I was employee number 8.
okay,
Their only Wi-Fi guy there. And I'm like, "Okay, what do you guys want me to test?" And they're like, "That's why we hired you. We don't know." And so that was like, "Oh, wow. I need to come up with all of the different um, test cases. I need to, understand how these devices are going to be used." And just that to me was just, I felt like I bit off more than I can chew, because coming into it, I knew it was a startup, and I'd worked at a startup before, early on when I was with this .com startup, about the time I graduated college. So I knew a bit about startups, but I didn't, I guess, know exactly to what extent um, my level of involvement was going to be.
mm-hmm.
And and really kind of defining what we need to test, how we need to test it, why we need to test it, what software do we need to test it. And so that's like in those early days, I figured out, okay, for all these tests we're doing here in the lab, I need to do packet captures. I need to actually see what's happening. So that's when we used OmniPeak, which was great at the time, but just super expensive. And then when I got out into the field doing, surveys at these stores, Channelizer and Ekahau, and just, it was just, I felt like I bit off more than I was able to chew at the time. And luckily they were like, well, Todd, you've got a bit of time to figure this out, but figure it out.
Yeah.
And if you worked at a startup before, everyone there is super invested in the company. And to the point to where everyone wants to know how everyone else is doing, and then that they're making progress. So everyone's in everyone's business. And so it was a very interesting time to kind of pull all that together, figure out what we needed to test and how we were going to test it. And so that was a big eye-opening experience for me. But again, I loved it because, I learned the why behind a lot of these tests that maybe I was mindlessly doing at Cisco, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just, yeah, I grew the most in my career working at the startup and just trying to make it all work.
My first time was my first on-site, at a VAR away from MediGeek. And I went on site to do a cutover of a new deployment. And they had DHCP running off of some sonic wall firewall, of which I knew nothing about. And I had to call up the person who hired me, which is Jake Snyder. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
That's always a fun call to have to make, right?
It was mortifying.
Yeah.
But he knew that I was like new to that kind of stuff, and I'm still pretty bad at firewalls. I'm happy to admit that now. I don't need to do it.
Yep.
But the reason I ask is because I think that that's where we get forged into the professionals that we are, is some of these failures, we came out of it, and it's okay to admit that we made some really dumb mistakes. So I really like to hear that question. I like to know where someone just was like, wow, this is a lot. But for you got a lot of really good experience. You learned how to build out an entire practice. And, there's plenty of people that can learn from doing that too,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we're about out of time here.
Yeah.
So yeah, appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.